This all works fine. It's just not what somebody has marketing. This is not cheese pizza, okay? This is homegrown potatoes. And lots of people grow potatoes because they know how. The problem is people don't know how to use direct drive systems. They're trying to control it. They want to keep the rich people in charge and tell us it's democracy in the process. So democracy is a big fuzzy word. It's like community, has lots of definitions. But democracy by any definition is antithetical to the concentration of economic power and wealth. You cannot have a democracy if a few people control the economy. I was really quite unhappy by the time I left that home I grew up in and came to community, and community saved my life. I wouldn't have made it without Twin Oaks, certainly. Anything you can do with AC power or fossil energy, you can do with DC power, durable systems, and renewable energy. It's just a question of reconfiguring and not buying what's sold to you.
They laugh at us for selling a bunch of 15-year-olds made from dinosaur bones singing, oh yeah, again and again, right up to the end. Let's
You've lived in community pretty much your entire adult life, or been associated with community?
Yes, I first came to intentional community in 1986 when I was, 85 was my first visit when I was 18 years old. And I became a member of Twin Oaks in 86 when I was 19 years old. And I've been in community ever since. Various communities, helped start a few.
One being the one we're at right now, Living Energy Farm.
Yes, Debbie and myself. Debbie is my wife and partner, and we had a board of directors of 10 or so people, I forget the exact number, who started Living Energy Farm 12 years ago with the intent of building an off-grid community, an energy self-sufficient community that was built in a manner that was accessible. It was inexpensive and durable, so working class people in other parts of the world might be able to benefit some from our work. We had no idea at the time how the course we would take. We've discovered a lot since then. It's been quite surprising, actually.
You are not Luddites here. You have described yourself as neo-Amish in the past. You embrace certain behavioral changes that match the technological systems that you can employ here.
Yes.
Maybe talk a little bit about capacity, the capacity of the systems here, and what behavioral changes you've had to make, or the typical American might expect to have to make.
Well, so the reality is that renewable energy works really well on a village scale. So what that means in terms of daily behavior, generally speaking, I get to play on the internet as much as I want, more or less, at this point. When we started out, we assumed we'd have no electronics out here. I had helped my friends build a number of off-grid houses, a number of off-grid kits, and they all failed over time, so we weren't going to do that. That's where the neo-Amish comes from, Amish without the patriarchy. We thought it would be simpler than it is now, simpler mechanically. But we've realized that we can support quite a bit of equipment and modern conveniences with a much, much simpler solar kit than most people use. So I get to play on the internet, I get a hot shower anytime I want, year-round, more or less. There is, for us, a little bit of what one might call rationing for 3 or 4 weeks in the depth of winter. So, starting late December through January, I don't get to watch the internet all night. If I want to stay up, my thing is looking at old rusty tractors on Craigslist and whatnot. Sometimes computers drain down, the batteries are drained down, and I have to turn off the computer. But that said, the people who have moved here, the people who started this project, were already accustomed to sharing resources. So for instance, if you just look at solar hot water, which is a very simple technology, you have solar collectors, you use antifreeze usually to gather the heat and pass that down to a tank. To do a good solar hot water system for a single couple in a small house would cost $5,000, give or take. But you take that same kit and maybe add a little bit of capacity, which adds very little to the actual cost, and you can provide hot water for 10 people. So the cost per capita plummets. The question is, how do you feel about having a bathroom and a hot water supply that other people also use? For most Americans, that is the issue. It's not the technology itself. And we think we can solve that with a bunch of solar panels and batteries. That's marketing. That's not reality. That's not the laws of physics. The laws of physics say that particularly with thermal systems, well-insulated buildings, solar hot water systems, we can support ourselves in a temperate climate with a very meager energy budget. We've got 1,400 watts worth of electricity. We've got a bunch of fairly cheap solar hot air collectors, and we don't burn firewood to heat our buildings. We don't burn propane or electricity to heat our buildings. They stay warm for the most part. I hope we're going to start developing this model more around off-grid apartments, off-grid condos. Going forward, I hope that's what we can do to kind of find a middle line where Americans can have some more of that privacy they like. But in terms of the lifestyle change, the sharing of resources is a big issue. We have a shared kitchen, shared bathrooms, shared thermal systems, shared shower, shared hot water systems. And for us, that's not an inconvenience. It's simply how we live. That said, if I'm going to cut firewood, we still do burn a little bit of firewood. We're still cooking on firewood, although we're close to finishing that. We're using biogas and solar electricity now to cook with. But if I am going to cut firewood, I'm not going to do that on a cloudy day. I'm not going to do that in the rain. I'm not going to do that at night. I'm going to wait till at least a moderately sunny day to run our heaviest electrical loads. So when I'm running some kind of shop equipment or some kind of cutting equipment that needs a really stronger electrical supply, and strong in this case, we're running the entire energy system for 10 people off of our peak output is as much as would run a single toaster, one toaster. And that provides all of our electrical needs, all of our shop, all of our farm, heating needs, all of that, one toaster. But to run that one toaster, I'm going to do it on a sunny day. Firewood saw, a chipper shredder that's going to grind a garden waste, I'm going to run that on a sunny day. That's the big lifestyle compromise. I can't run a tool at midnight. Doesn't seem like a big sacrifice to me because I don't want to work at midnight.
Explain that a little more clearly, that one toaster you're talking about. The system here at LEF.
We have a lot of thermal systems. We have a lot of good insulation. But the thing that kind of ties it together, the thing that gets people's attention is the electrical systems. And most electrical systems, grid powers, there's one 4-aught cable, comes into your house, 200 amp supply. That's what people are used to. The solar kits try to imitate that with a big battery set, inverter, and everything runs off of one power supply. We have 8 systems. 7 out of the 8 are really quite tiny. Several of them are super tiny. A little solar panel runs a pump to pump the antifreeze from the solar hot water collectors down to the storage tank. The advantage of having that as a separate system is it runs independently, so if there's any overloading or any change in the system, it doesn't affect that portion of the system. The refrigerator, one solar panel is tied to the refrigerator. So we took a lightning strike on that particular circuit a few years ago. It did some damage, but it didn't damage anything else. We started out assuming we'd not have any computers out here, but now we have computers, but we have a battery set designated specifically for the computers. So that is the battery set that takes the most draw. So in the wintertime, we do ration computer use because we don't want to have a massive solar kit just to provide us a few more hours of computer use in the dead of winter. Our biggest solar circuit is the direct drive circuit. That is a high voltage DC circuit. It is about 1,400 watts. And when you toast your bread, you push that little lever and those little glowing wires come on, that's about 1,400 watts. So our high voltage circuit is about 1,400 watts. The other parts of the circuit are much smaller in terms of power capacity. So that 1,400 watt circuit, high voltage DC, runs 20-some different appliances and motors, fully tooled machine shop, seed cleaning equipment, seed processing equipment. In the kitchen, we run blenders and grain grinders and whatever food processing equipment we run. All of that ties back to that one. It's 6 solar panels, 1,400 watts. That one set of solar panels does all of that. And you can't overload it, or you can overload it, but nothing bad happens. When you overload it, the motor just slows down a little bit. So the solar industry has been built around the idea that you can't run a refrigerator or a grain grinder or whatever without a battery set to start the motor and to make sure the motor runs. That's all marketing. It's just not true. DC motors, just normal industrial motors. If you go to eBay or wherever and you type in 90 volt DC motor or 90 volt or 180 volt DC motor, those are the DC voltages, The thing that rolls up on your screen, they're called permanent magnet motors. They're used a lot in industry. They're cheaper than AC motors. They do have brushes that have to be replaced, but only once in a long, long while, and the brushes are very cheap. But the point is that those motors will start at very low power. They will fluctuate as the power goes up or down, and you can do all kinds of work with them. Universal motors, we're going to do a separate video talking about motors, but you have a lot of different choices about how you run your appliances. This all works fine. It's just not what somebody has marketing. This is not cheese pizza, okay? This is homegrown potatoes. And lots of people grow potatoes because they know how. The problem is people don't know how to use the direct drive systems because nobody's marketed. Nobody's spent $10 million to create a marketing campaign to market connecting 3 or 6 solar panels to motors to run your whole life.
And we all grew up in AC systems, and
Yes.
that toaster you're talking about that draws 1,400 watts when it's running was designed for an AC system.
Right.
And that's just one way to toast bread.
Sure. I toast bread every evening for my kids on a biogas stove. Biogas, natural gas is the same thing as biogas, is the same thing as methane. Those are all the same thing. There are different ways to do it. It doesn't have to be AC power.
Let's think about the couple that's escaping the city, and they have the dreams of a homestead, and they have a bunch of cash, and these are the types of people who get sold on these large lithium-ion arrays. You're talking about technologies that are most appropriate for a village setting or a cooperative group living type thing, co-housing type thing. What are the applications for that family who's seriously considering purchasing a $50,000 or $100,000 array for their little homestead off in the woods?
Well,
As far as DC power goes, DC system.
you can certainly, anything you can do with AC power or fossil energy, you can do with DC power, durable systems, and renewable energy. It's just a question of reconfiguring and not buying what's sold to you. So as an environmentalist, as somebody who believes in social justice, it's not my job to tell rich young couples from the city how to consume in a different way. But that said, just from a mechanical perspective, you can do things differently. The first thing I would suggest, if you're the rich couple from the city, is see if you can find another couple to work with. Even 4 people is way better than 2, notwithstanding if you've got some kids or whatever. You know, and a couple more would be even better. But even 4 people, you start to get a lot more flexibility in what you can do. One person can take care of the biogas while somebody else is cooking dinner, for instance. You get a lot more leverage. But that said, you can do direct drive. The direct drive systems we've been adapting in the Caribbean, and we've done some work in Arizona on the Navajo and Hopi reservations. We've been bringing people to Living Energy Farm from Sub-Saharan Africa, Western Africa, India. So we're trying to think about how to adapt our systems to the least possible cost, scaling down, scaling up, depending. So there's not one answer to the question of how do you power a DC, farmstead or a homestead or a home on DC power. And it's actually kind of a double-edged sword in that DC voltages, there's 12, 24, 48, 90, 180. There's a lot of different options. And that's a good thing in that it makes these systems very adaptable. It's a bad thing in that it requires a little bit more skill on the design side. You have to know a little bit more to design a good system. And that is what it is. Over time, we're hoping we can build a market for it, not in terms of making a rich person richer, but in terms of having more people understand how these systems work.
Do you see any political element in decentralizing yourself and getting yourself away from the grip of an electric utility?
Yes, I do. The core of my personal philosophy is around personal empowerment. We have been taught to believe that solutions come down from up above. Self-determination, the ability of groups of people to own the means of production, to grow their own food, produce products they can sell to other people at a community or village level is, in my mind, the most important thing. You can talk all the philosophy you want. I've done lots of organizing, that's fine for what it is, political organizing. But at the end of the day, who controls the food, the water, the means by which we are fed and clothed and kept warm in the wintertime is who determines the political evolution of our society. It is no coincidence that the kind of polarization and off-the-rail right-wing crazy stuff that's happening in the United States corresponds with a concentration of economic power. It's also no coincidence that they're trying now to derail localize solar power and build massive solar fields. That is a conspiracy, or whatever you want to call it, to turn solar panels into boilers that are under the control of rich people. There's even at least a couple of states now that have banned off-grid solar, fully independent homes. They're trying to control it. They want to keep the rich people in charge and tell us it's democracy in the process. Democracy, so democracy is a big fuzzy word. It's like community, has lots of definitions, but democracy by any definition is antithetical to the concentration of economic power and wealth. You cannot have a democracy if a few people control the economy.
What do you think is needed to help grow communities like LEF and start new communities like LEF?
The answer to that question depends on where you're doing it, who you're doing it with, and so let me just give you a few scenarios. One scenario is progressive people who are willing to share resources. Mostly what they lack is money and land, and sometimes just cohesion. We need to get over the idea that any form of leadership is evil. No, tribal communities always had a kinship system and some leadership within that kinship system, and mostly that leadership serves the group. Leadership is not evil. To lump, Exxon and Amazon in the same pot with a local organizer who's just trying to help you get your work done is stupid. So we need to respect local leaders. We need to expect when we have a group of people, and we have a couple of people in there who are willing to work for the benefit of the group, they deserve if you're willing to support them and help them, then the group accomplishes something. If you turn your angst against the powers that be, against those local organizers, you just destroy the group. And that happens every day, all over the world. You can go and see it throughout history. And it cripples us constantly. Every day it cripples us. So finding the capital resources to get young people or people who are willing to live together, and then finding a way to hold them together and respect the organizers, that's what they need.
You've mainly been doing work in Puerto Rico. You're in the American Southwest. You talk about Africa a lot. Mm-hmm. Logistically, that's a whole different scale. What are you seeking? Are you trying to make relationships with large established NGOs that already have supply chains set up over there?
The Global South, as it's called, there are several billion people living who don't have a lot of money, live in places that are fairly sunny, and don't have huge thermal needs mostly. They don't have big houses they need to keep warm. They just need to pump water, grind grain. And in that case, we're looking at trying to develop village-level systems where we've got one DC microgrid powering the grain grinding, the water pumping, the sewing machines, the firewood, wood cutting, metalworking, whatever. We can do all of that, daylight drive, with one fairly modest set of solar panels. So there, honestly, I think it's just a question of helping people understand it. I mean, obviously, poor people struggle to buy the equipment, but I think it's mostly within the means of a lot of people. It's the technology that has failed, or the transmission of the technology. So I would love to see this movement grow, and I don't know how, or there's not a single answer to that. We're certainly going to seek more funding. We're certainly going to seek to work with existing organizations. The batteries are not critical with what we do, and all batteries are DC, so it's not a question of finding DC batteries. And I like the nickel-iron batteries, but it's actually not that important. That's not critical to the daylight drive, direct drive aspect of this. So, the answer to how do we do it is any way we can. Currently we've spent most of the funding that we currently had banked. So we're looking for more funding. We're looking for other organizations that can work with us. We do have a group in Puerto Rico that I think is going to set up basically a social service project where we bring down solar refrigerators and other equipment and supply that to low-income people who need it. People who are living out in the country but need to refrigerate medications or whatever. And that'll be great. That'll be 15 or 20 or 30 homes probably in the next go-around. So we'll pursue, probably the near term sees us doing social service work in Puerto Rico, so providing these DC energy systems to people who need it. We could go back to Arizona with the Navajo and Hopi. We've have some good connections at the Navajo Technical University to put solar cookers out there. That would be fairly inexpensive if we can find the human power to make that happen. So I think it's likely we'll pull that project off in the next couple of years. I mean, Africa's a big place with a lot of people and a lot of organizations. We have a number of personal contacts in different organizations. So right now we're sort of reaching out to people to come up with a strategy of the best way to do this. Unfortunately, egos and money, it all gets in the way. It's not just a question of going to the engineers who are putting, they go and spend $1 million, a lot of money to put in these wells in African villages. And they have, these electrical engineers don't want to hear what we're talking about. So the organizations are often pretty intransigent. They either want to run AC systems, or when we tell them we can describe an overloaded direct drive DC system, they don't understand it. The engineers all live on grid. All of these people who run these NGOs trying to help the poor brown people are mostly white people who live on grid. So, one of the things that's different about LEF is we live with these energy systems every day, so we see what works and what doesn't work. But I've bumped heads with quite a few engineers now, and I've been surprised at how little they understand the actual equipment. They're looking for profitable, packaged equipment that they can put their name on, whatever. So I don't know how that's all going to sort out. We're certainly happy to find any answer that works, but more funding, more connections, organizations that'll work with us, whatever we can find. Right now our impact is small and limited, and I would like to see it grow.
I typically ask people, where did you grow up and how were you raised?
I was part of where I come from an unusual circumstance. I was born in a very Christian, very southern family just north of Savannah, Georgia, in the countryside. And my father was mentally ill and abusive, but also really well respected. He was a politician. And I was raised very Christian. So there were a lot of pressures that could have come out in any number of different ways. But for me, I kind of transferred the Christian ideology over to an environmental ideology. It seems to me that whatever higher powers or are manifest in the living world around us, and that is sacred to me, and that's what I defend. I was really quite unhappy by the time I left that home I grew up in and came to community, and community saved my life. I wouldn't have made it without Twin Oaks, certainly. So I'm a little saddened now to see the community's movement is not evolving in a constructive way. I don't think it's, and I wish there were a better answer to that, but Americans are quite narcissistic. In any case, I feel like my personality was forged as much as formed by the stresses I grew up with. It was not easy.
Try not to think so much about the truly staggering amount of oil that it takes to make a record. All the shipping, the vinyl, the cell.